How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday evening, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. 2 days away. Can't find my lighter. Who's in the house on a Sunday as we get back on track? We are on the schedule since we were 2 pages ahead when I left town for the weekend. Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula is here, Shandora in the Bronx, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Joseph in Massachusetts, David in Indiana. Joseph got COVID, but at least I get to quarantine and study some more. May you have a refuah shlema, Joseph, a complete recovery, and may it be speedy. And we say amen. Chaim in Florida, Marjorie says shalom, Ella says shalom, Joe in the Inland Empire, welcome everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by William Kabaker. In memory of Oren Kabaker, Zichrono Livracha, may Oren's memory always be for a blessing. And Bill, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. All right, tonight's daf, very short. I'll just mention this. So I had the opportunity to teach the daf, page 30, that we learned together on Thursday on our Shabbaton this weekend. And it was a little nerve-wracking because there were some very, sort of high-powered rabbis in the class learning from me. Who am I to teach these rabbis our daf? One of the main differences between our Daf Yomi Shir here that we do together and most of the Daf Yomi Shirim in the world, perhaps all, if you go to All Daf, the app, for example, there's lots of teachers teaching Daf Yomi, but it's in that, that yeshivish world, right? And it's just an assumption that everyone in the class already has so much knowledge, has a really firm grasp of Hebrew, so many Hebrew words and Aramaic words just interspersed with the teaching. And, that was very off-putting to me the first time I tried going to Daf Yomi Shir, the first cycle that I was learning. And so that's why I've always been committed to just always teach in English. And if I use any of the words, from the Gemara, whether in Hebrew or in Aramaic, to translate them right away. But now that we've been doing this together, while we always do it in English, our learning does not lack any sophistication. And the comment that I got from this one rabbi, and he's really a gifted teacher. I mean, just a delight to learn from, with a vast, repository of knowledge. A great rabbi. And after he sat through my class, teaching just the way I teach it to you, his comment was, Sal, I got to tell you, you make that class very clear. Like your conceptual clarity of what it is that the class is learning and how you're getting it across, is exceptional. And it's very humbling for me. I'm really not, humble bragging that I did that. I just feel like this is something that we've done together, that we as a class have been sort of doing this together, learning every day now, well over 3 years. And, and you've raised me up so much. The questions that you guys ask at the end of class every day, and the challenge to, I don't just read what Rav Steinsaltz wrote, but you hear me always interspersing, well, this is how we do it, and this would be an example, and this is what's going on, and this is the context that we're in, what number Mishna in the chapter, etc. And, the class, who've learned, at the Mir Yeshiva, and people were learning in some really high-level places, said that what we're doing here, it's good. It's good what we're doing here together. So I thank you, my friends and colleagues, in our learning journey. Okay. So we are holding on page 31a here in Tractate Bava, Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 3, and today covering Mishnah number 5, and we'll open Mishnah number 6 on this quite short daf. Okay, right near the top, Mishnah number 5. In the case of two potters who are carrying pots and who were walking one after the other in the public domain, and the first stumbled on a bump and fell, and the second one stumbled over the first and fell too. So the first is liable to pay for the damage incurred by the second. What difference does it make that they're potters? Presumably that they're carrying a bunch of pots. And when they fall down, these clay pots, clay vessels, are going to break. And that's a big damage that is sustained. Okay, so one trips over a bump, he falls down. The second guy trips over the first guy, not the bump. And presumably they both drop a bunch of clay pots in the street. Okay, so now we're saying that the first guy who fell is liable to pay for the damage incurred by the second. You know, the poor guy, he falls down, and it's not bad enough that he fell down and a bunch of his stuff broke, but now he's going to be liable to pay for the damage incurred by the second. Why? Let's learn. The Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan said, do not say that the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir says that one who stumbles is considered negligent and therefore liable, right? So Rabbi Meir, very stringent, very machmir opinion that if you're walking around in the street and you fall down, it's your fault. You should have watched more carefully. If there was a bunch of potholes, you should have walked slower. If you were going too fast, you should have walked slower. If you were walking around at night and you didn't see it, you should have been more careful. You should have brought a light with you, a torch, a flashlight, something. Rabbi Meir says it's your fault. You're personally responsible. And if you falling down not only results in damage to you and your stuff, but also hurts somebody else, you're to blame. Rabbi Meir was in the minority. He was overruled by the majority, right? So Rabbi Yochanan is saying that this Mishnah is not according to Rabbi Meir, who is of the opinion that one who stumbles is negligent, but continues Rabbi Yochanan, rather, even according to the rabbis, who say that one who stumbles is generally a victim of circumstances beyond his control and is consequently exempt. Here, in the case of this Mishnah, he is liable, since after falling, he had the opportunity to stand up and he did not stand up, right? So Rabbi Yochanan is saying, don't rely on Rabbi Meir's minority, very stringent opinion to say that one who stumbles is negligent. Rather say, even according to the rabbis, that don't blame a person for stumbling. Here, the first one is liable because after he fell down, he didn't get back up, right? Presumably he didn't get back up quickly. He didn't vacate the problem. He was just, think about how often we all do this. Oh, I had such bad luck. And you just sit there bemoaning your fate rather than get yourself up and moving again. And because you were so focused, because I was so focused on my own problems, I didn't realize that me, in the act of bemoaning my problems, sitting in the street, I created a hazard. While I was feeling sorry for myself, I created a hazard that was avoidable if I would have just got up and got out of the way. So Rav Nachman Bar, and honestly, have we not all seen people who have a little, fender bender? They have a little bump, and they get out of their cars and they're so angry at each other. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. Okay, both of you can have that argument when you pull both cars off the road and let the rest of the traffic go through. Because while you're sitting there arguing whose fault it was, you created a hazard, at the very least a traffic jam, and possibly something much worse if somebody comes along and doesn't see the two of you. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, even if you say that he did not have the opportunity to stand up, he had the opportunity to warn the person behind him, and he did not warn him, right? The first guy goes down, he's like trying to pick up his pots, and he knows that people are coming up behind him, but he forgot, he doesn't care, all he's thinking about is his own problems. At the very least, he could have said, hey, I'm down here, be careful, right? So you have this duty to warn others when you're the one creating the hazard. And Rabbi Yochanan could have said in response to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that since he did not have the opportunity to stand up, he did not have the opportunity to warn the other person either, as he was busy trying to stand up. It's not that he was sitting there bemoaning his fate or cleaning up his pottery shards. He was literally trying to get himself up. He just didn't do it in time. Rabbi Yochanan would have him exempt in that situation. Therefore, the Mishnah, which holds him liable, must be referring to a case where he could have stood up. Right? He had the opportunity to stand up, he didn't, and that's why he's liable according to our Mishnah. The Gemara attempts to prove that the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is correct. We learned in the next Mishnah on page 31b, if the owner of a crossbeam was walking in the public domain carrying his beam first, and the owner of a barrel was walking with his barrel last, meaning behind him, and the barrel was broken by the crossbeam, the one who carried the crossbeam is exempt. But if the owner of the crossbeam stopped, he is liable since the accident was caused by his stopping. Now that would be news to most American insurance companies, right? Most of the time, if you're the car behind, then you crash into the car in front of you, even though he stopped short, you are to blame because you hit him from behind. And he was in front of you, and if he stopped so suddenly that you were not able to stop, it's your fault because you were too close. You didn't leave enough space for the sudden stop, the unexpected sudden stop. How often do you see a car tailgating another car and you think to yourself, what's that guy doing? He's too close to the car ahead of him. If the car ahead of him has a sudden problem, this car behind is gonna hit him. Why is he doing that? He's creating the hazard by going up there too close. But here, and according to the next Mishnah that we're going to read tonight, if the one who's walking, normally the one behind carrying the barrel, if he crashes into the guy who's carrying a crossbeam, a big wooden beam, so the guy behind is to blame. But if the guy walking in front with the crossbeam, that the guy behind just expects him to keep going at a steady pace, and he suddenly stops, and the guy with the barrel walks into him, then the guy with the crossbeam is to blame for stopping short and not giving warning and not anticipating that if he stops like that, he's going to create a problem behind him. And you know what? It's not so counterintuitive, because if you're thinking about carrying a crossbeam, right? So like a big, heavy wooden beam, maybe with several guys, you're carrying that. There's a certain amount of momentum with it, right? And you're not a truck. You don't have brake lights. You're just a person. And you do have the ability to stop short, right? And the guy behind you, he was just a pedestrian walking behind you with a barrel. If you're in a flow of pedestrians, you might want to think to yourself, if I stop short, somebody behind me is going to hit me. I better stop a little more gradually. I better give some warning. Hey, I'm stopping now. Right? I used to bicycle race many years ago, and when we would ride in a peloton, right? When we would ride in a pack, it was very much necessary in the midst of all these riders who are literally shoulder to shoulder and wheel to wheel, that if you're going to slow down, you give some signals, right? You put your hand down, I'm slowing down, or a hand up, just to give warning that something's going on, or even to shout, slowing down, that kind of thing. Giving warning is a duty that we have, and you see it here from the next Mishnah. Now, why is it being brought? The next Mishnah is being brought now. And the Gemara asks, and what is it not referring to? A situation where the one carrying the crossbeam stopped. Why did he stop? He stopped in order to adjust the load on his shoulder, which is the normative behavior of one carrying a beam, and is not considered negligence. And nevertheless, the Tana teaches that he is liable, as although he had the opportunity to warn the person behind him that he was about to stop, he did not warn him. And this supports the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Right? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is saying, okay, you fell, you didn't have time to get up, warn the guy behind you that you're on the ground because maybe it's in the dark, or you're carrying the crossbeam. Okay, you need to stop and adjust the beam. It's heavy, but say, hey, I'm stopping, I'm slowing down, move over to the side. You got to have some awareness, some situational awareness of who's around you, what's around you, and the fact that your actions can very much impact the people around you. So the Gemara responds, no. It is referring to a situation where the one carrying the crossbeam stopped to rest, which could not have been anticipated by the person walking behind him, and that's why he's liable. But the Gemara asks, but according to this interpretation, if he stopped to adjust the load on his shoulder, what is the law? Is he exempt? If so, rather than teaching the latter clause of the Mishna, but if he said to the owner of the barrel, stop, he is exempt, the Tan of that Mishnah should have distinguished and taught it within the former case itself, like this. The Mishnah should have been worded, in what case is this statement that he is liable said? In a case where he stopped to rest, but in a case where he stopped to adjust the load on his shoulder, he is exempt. So the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is presented in this manner because it teaches us a novelty, a chiddush, that even if he stopped to rest, in a case when he says to the owner of the barrel, stop, he is exempt, right? So again, if you give warning, if you let people know what it is that you're doing, if you communicate, hey, I'm going to stop, then whether you stop to adjust the beam on your shoulder or because you needed a rest or because you didn't want to walk into a pothole or for whatever the reason, if you just speak up and say, hey, stopping here, then the people around you will be on notice. So come in here, an alternative proof from what is taught in a baraisa with regard to potters and glaziers who were walking one after the other, and the first stumbled and fell, and the second one stumbled over the first, sustaining damage, and the third stumbled over the second, right? 3 potters walking in a row, one stumbles, we don't know over what he stumbled, some kind of a bump. The second one stumbles over the first who fell, and then the third one stumbles over the second who stumbled over the first, and the 2 of them are still lying on the ground, presumably. Okay, so what happens? Over the second. So in this case, the first person is liable to pay for the damage of the second because he was negligent when he fell down, or because he didn't get up, or because he didn't give warning, right? But the first is liable to pay for the damage of the second, and the second person is liable to pay for the damage of the third, presumably because he didn't give warning or he didn't get up when he could have. But if they all fell because of the first person went down and the next 2 tripped over him, then the first is liable to pay for the damage of them all. And if they warned each other, i.e. each one warned the next, then they are all exempt. And the Gemara concludes, so what? Is it not a case where they did not have the opportunity to stand up, and they are nevertheless liable to pay, not because they didn't get up, but because they didn't warn the person behind them? And this would be in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. And the Gemara answers, no, you've misunderstood. It is a case where they had the opportunity to stand up, and they did not do so. So the Gemara asks, but according to this interpretation, if they did not have the opportunity to stand up, what would be the law? Would they be exempt? If so, rather than teaching in the latter clause of the Baraisa that if they warned one another they are exempt, let the Tana of that Baraisa distinguish and teach within the former case itself as follows. In what case is this statement that they are all liable said? It is said in a case where they had the opportunity to stand up, but if they did not have the opportunity to stand up, they are exempt. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa is presented in this manner because it teaches us this novelty, that even if they had the opportunity to stand up, in a case where they warned each other, they are exempt. It's not that you have to get up and keep moving because somebody else might bump into you, but you have to give them a chance. Hey, I'm hurt, I'm lying here. Hey, I'm taking a rest. Hey, I'm here, don't trip over me. It's just a matter of being aware of who's around you and not being so obsessed with your own problems that you don't give that warning. Now, with regard to this law, Rava said the first one who stumbled is liable to pay for the damage of the second, both for the damage caused to the second person by his body and for damage caused to him by his property. By contrast, the second is liable to pay for the damage of the third only with regard to damage caused by his body as a result of the fall and not with regard to damage caused by his property, right? The first one stumbled. Perhaps he was negligent. Now he's on the ground and his broken pots are on the ground, right? The second one, if he stumbles over the body of the first guy is liable for what results. If he stumbles over the vessels, the broken pots of the first guy is liable. But now that the second guy went down and it's the first guy's fault, right? So then what happens with regard to the third guy coming along? If he trips over the second guy's body, what is the result? And how does that differ from when the third guy trips over the vessels of the second guy? And the difference is going to be, well, the second guy, if it's his body that the third one trips over, the second guy could have got up, could have given a warning. So he's going to be liable. But with regard to the broken vessels on the ground of the second guy, if the third guy trips over those broken vessels, then the second guy is exempt. Why? Because why are his broken vessels lying in the street? Because of the negligence of the first guy. Let's continue. Where am I? Right, so the first one who stumbled is liable to pay for the damage of the second, both for damage caused to the second person by his body and for damage caused to him by his property. By contrast, the second guy is liable to pay for the damage of the third only with regard to damage caused by his body, the second guy's body, as a result of the fall, but not with regard to the damage caused by his broken vessels. So the Gemara questions Rava's statement. Whichever way you look at this, it's difficult to understand. If Rava maintains that one who stumbles is considered negligent, by Rabbi Meir, so then the second person should also be liable to pay for all forms of damage caused by his negligence. And if Rava maintains that one who stumbles is not considered negligent, per the opinion of the majority who overrules Rabbi Meir, then even the first guy should be exempt from liability for the damage incurred by the second because he wasn't negligent when he went down. Now we're on 31b, and the Gemara explains the first is certainly considered negligent and is therefore liable to pay for damage caused by both his body and his property. The second one is deemed liable to pay for damage caused by his body. Why? Because he had the opportunity to stand up and he did not stand up. But for damage caused by his property that was lying there and that caused the third person to stumble and fall, the second one is exempt, as he can say to the third one, I did not dig this pit, meaning I did not cause this obstacle, since it was the first person who stumbled and brought about the situation where the items of the second person were lying on the ground. The second one is not deemed liable for harm caused by his vessels that are lying in the street. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to Rava's statement from a Baraisa that comments on this case. All of them are liable to pay for damage caused by their bodies and exempt from paying restitution for damage caused by their property. What, does this not refer even to the first, indicating that even he is exempt from damage caused by his property? And the Gemara answers, no, it is referring to all of them except for the first. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't the Baraisa teach the term all of them, indicating that the first is also included? So Rav Ada bar Ahava said the term all of them refers only to those who incurred damage and excludes the first one who only caused damage to others. Any damage that he himself incurred, that was his own fault. So the Gemara questions this answer. What is this interpretation? Granted, if you say that the term includes even the first, so this explanation is consistent with that which is taught, all of them. But if you say that it is referring to all of them except for the first, what is the reason that the misleading term all of them is used? Let the Baraisa teach more accurately that those who incur damage are liable in turn for the damage caused by their bodies, but are exempt from paying restitution for damage caused by their property, which was lying in the street because of an earlier person's fall. Rather, this entire explanation of Rava's statement should be rejected, and it should be explained differently as follows. Rava said that the first is liable both for injury caused to the body of the second person and for damage caused to the property of the second. And the second is liable to pay for damage incurred by the third with regard to his body, but not with regard to damage to his property. And what is the reason for the... So it's not what part of the second one caused damage, his body or his vessels that are lying in the street, but rather what kind of damage the third one sustained to his body or to his vessels. Right? So let's read that again. Rava said the first is liable for injury caused to the body of the second and for damage caused to the property of the second. And the second one is liable to pay for damage incurred by the third person with regard to injury to his body, but not with regard to damage to his property. And what is the reason for the exemption in the last case? It is because after his fall, the body of the second person is effectively a pit. And we do not find that in the category of pit, one is liable to pay restitution for damage caused to vessels, right? As we learn per Shmuel, that when somebody leaves an open hole in the public domain, according to what the Torah says, if a person or an animal falls into that hole and is injured, the one who dug the pit is liable to pay for that. But if vessels fall into that hole, he's exempt from that. And so now we're saying that when the first one stumbled and fell negligently and then caused the second one to fall, well, now the second one, his body lying there in the street, is likened to a pit created by the first person, which now the third person comes along and encounters and falls because of it. So the Gemara answers, but not the third person's property, not his vessels, right? Because they would be like a pit. The second person is a pit. So if the third person trips over that person's body, liability. But for who? For the second, because he didn't get up. But since the body lying in the street is like a pit, the vessels of the third do not get recompensed if they're broken. So the Gemara says, this works out well according to Shmuel, who says that any obstacle that was placed in the public domain constitutes a pit, i.e. the laws of a pit apply to it. But according to Rav, who says that if one placed it there, if the one who placed it there renounces ownership of the hazardous object, then it is considered a pit. But if he does not renounce ownership of it, then it is not considered a pit. What is there to say? What he's saying is, if you leave a hole in the public domain, it's not you dug it, so you're liable for any damage that it causes, but it's not your property. You're just because it's in the public domain, the hole that you dug. So when Shmuel says that if you leave, like a toy truck on the sidewalk and somebody comes along and has a slip and fall because of it, okay, you created that hazard and you're going to be liable. But what kind? For the body, always. But if it hurts vessels, right? If somebody, because that truck is there, something ends up broken, or the truck, somehow impacts somebody's an object that belongs to somebody and breaks it. So Shmuel would say no liability for damage to objects, to things that end up getting broken because of the obstacle you created, that little, toy truck that you left in the street. Rava says, well, wait a minute. That toy truck, if you abandoned it, then it's like a pit, and then Shmuel's rule would apply, that you're liable for damage and injury caused to people and animals, but not to their stuff. But if you didn't renounce ownership of that toy truck, then it's your property that's out there in the public domain causing damage to others, and whether it's to their body or their animal or their inanimate objects, you are liable for that. That's the difference between Rava and Shmuel in this respect. Between Rav and Shmuel in this respect. So that's why the Gemara is saying, This works out well according to Shmuel, who says that any obstacle that was placed in the public domain constitutes a pit and the laws of a pit apply to it. But according to Rav, who says that if the one who placed it there renounces ownership of the hazardous object, it is considered a pit. But if he does not renounce ownership, then it is not considered a pit, meaning he has greater liability because it's his property that's causing damage. So according to Rav, what is there to say? The second one who fell obviously did not renounce ownership of his body, so why is he exempt from damage he caused to vessels of the third guy as though he were a pit? And the Gemara, because he didn't get up, that's why he remains a pit and an obstacle. So the Gemara answers, well, actually, Rava's statement should be explained as he was understood to have said initially, i.e., that he distinguishes between damage caused by another's body and damage caused by his property. And as for your difficulty from the statement in the Baraisa that all of them are liable to pay for the damage caused by their bodies, but exempt from paying restitution for the damage caused by their property, apparently including even the first one, which is contrary to Rava's opinion. So Rav Ada bar Menyumi interpreted before Ravina as referring to a case where vessels were damaged by vessels. In other words, it is not the body, but the vessels of the second one that were damaged by the property of the first. And since the broken vessels of the first have the status of a pit, the owner is exempt from liability for damage caused to the vessels of others, per Shmuel. Now, the masters said above, if they all fell because of the first is liable to pay for the damage of them all. The Gemara asks, how did they all fall because of the first? And Rav Papa said, it is a case where he blocked the road like a skeleton, filling the entire width of the road and causing the rest to stumble over different parts of his body. And Rav Zevid said he fell diagonally like a blind man's cane, and they all stumbled over him. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Now we're just going to read Mishnah number 6, and then we're going to be done for today. Short class, as I mentioned. So get your comments and questions in. Here's Mishnah number 6 to conclude our daf today. If this person came in the public domain with his barrel, and that person came from the opposite direction with his crossbeam, and this one's jug was broken by that one's crossbeam, so the one carrying the crossbeam is exempt because this one had permission to walk in the public domain and that one had permission to walk there. It's just an accident. Okay, one was carrying a beam, one was carrying a jug, they bumped into each other. No one was doing anything wrong. It's just an accident. If they were walking in the same direction, so that the owner of the crossbeam was walking in front and the owner of the barrel was walking behind him, and the barrel was broken by the crossbeam, so then the owner of the crossbeam is exempt, since the owner of the barrel saw him in front of him and should have been more careful not to run into the beam. But, as we read earlier, if the owner of the crossbeam stopped, now we're on page 32a, causing the barrel to collide with the beam and break, so then the owner of the crossbeam is liable, since the one behind had no way of anticipating that the one in front would suddenly stop. And if he said to the owner of the barrel, stop, then he's exempt, right? In other words, they didn't have brake lights, but if you have brake lights that work, then you gave the warning. Then you're off the hook. But if your brake lights don't work, if you didn't give that warning, hey, I'm stopping, then you're going to be liable. Conversely, if the owner of the barrel was walking first and the owner of the crossbeam last, and the barrel was broken by the crossbeam, the owner of the crossbeam is liable. But if the owner of the barrel stopped, the owner of the crossbeam is exempt from liability for breaking the barrel. And if he said to the owner of the crossbeam, stop, and the owner of the crossbeam kept walking, then the owner of the crossbeam is liable. And similarly, these laws apply in a case where this one came with his lamp and that one came with his flax, and the lamp set fire to the flax. Again, right, if one bumps into the other, he's going to be liable. But if the other one stops short, he's going to be liable. But if the one who stops short gives warning, hey, I'm stopping, then he's not liable. And that's Mishnah number 6. All right, we'll take a few questions on Bava, Kamma 31. Shandora. considering that it's common to yell, whoa, when you fall, people tend not to be silent. So then most people are exempt. I think you're absolutely right if you're giving that warning. Bill, what's the turnaround time on one's liability? A man falls in the street on a dark night, and a heartbeat later, another man coming from the other way trips over him. The first man had no time to react except to his own fall. So is he still liable? And I think that's why they were making the distinction. Did he have time to get up or not? So in your example, he did not. I think a good question that we should ask is, well, wait a minute. What if the reason that it took him a long time to get up is because he got hurt? Right? So the first one trips. Maybe he was negligent. Okay, he fell down. Poor guy broke his leg, broke his elbow. Who knows? He's hurt. He's like, oh. Now maybe we say because he's hurt, he was unable to get up, and we can't ascribe negligence to him. Even though he was negligent perhaps to fall, the fact that he didn't get up wasn't due to his negligence because he was unable. So presumably that time of turnaround is going to depend on a lot of circumstances. Not only how fast or slow the guy was to get up, but what his ability to get up was, what kind of situation he was in, what was around him, etc. Lucy, but isn't the first person who falls also becoming like a pit? So why then would he be liable to the property damage of the second? Lucy, you clearly understand what we're talking about. Exactly. You are asking per Shmuel. And they were saying sometimes per Shmuel and sometimes per Rav. And Sharon seems so lacking in nuance. There are so many subtleties that impact the outcome. How much latitude do the rabbis have at the time of decision making? I mean, this is actually for better and for worse, right? Why we rely on a halakhic authority and not a jury. A jury is going to be swayed by lots of things, including emotion. You hope that the judge, who's a halakhic authority, extremely well versed in all these nuances of the law, can take into account all these different circumstances. Now, the reason that, the American jurisprudential system is not based always on judges, but we also bring in juries and we have higher courts, etc., appellate courts, right, is because we can't be sure that every judge is learned enough and that every judge is not corrupt, and that every judge is not biased. And so we have to have lots of checks and balances. How many checks and balances do we have, when two people appear before the rabbi? The hope, the prayer, is that the rabbi has been learning for a long time, is utterly dedicated to getting the right answer, and though he might make a mistake, he won't make a mistake because he's biased or because he's corrupt, etc., but that, where he has learned all of this, and, so often there's going to be multiple opinions to rely on. But even where you're seeing that, okay, we're clear what the law is according to the majority, which overruled the minority opinion. That's the law. But given the circumstances, given the situation, bringing in these novel facts. Did he say stop? Did he not? Could he get up? Could he not get up? Did he lose his cane? Was it in the dark? Were people pressuring him? Were people yelling at him? There's all these circumstances that will play into it. So I would actually disagree and say the cases that we learned here in our cursory, exploration of this aspect of liability law for the, bumps in the street, we only studied a few cases. And so we didn't get into all of the nuances. But I would say that even in these cases, the possibility of nuance was explored. And, the one who actually is going to become a judge and hold himself out to be a judge would understand from the way that nuance crept into these various cases, that nuance can always come from new and unexpected sources. And he's got to develop, the most equitable judgment in the halakhic framework, but taking into account the particular set of facts. And finally, Joseph, perfect example for me yesterday. I got hit in the head by a parking garage gate. I'm very accident prone, walking around thinking about things, not paying attention. But the booth operator did not warn me either. In this case, who would be at fault? We would have to know more facts. But I hope you're okay, and I hope you heal quickly from your bump. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 32. Have a great night.